1. Brother Malcolm was astounded. "Is that all? Then what about the houses and yourself? For surely you must have a story of your own to tell." "Indeed," said Gabriel, "but that is a more complicated one, and not entirely pleasant, for you see it is a tragedy." "A tragedy? How come? How is it possible? In this consummate paradise of peace and harmony? You must be kidding. That would be the utterly supremest paradox." "I am not joking, although I can understand your incredulity, but all things here, as you can see, are utterly incredible. But on the other hand, my friend, there's nothing nor in heaven nor on earth or in the seas that is impossible." 2. The first one who arrived here, as you know, was Manuel, a stranded Spaniard from Alicante, wayward, lost, and something of an exile, who around the world sought desperately for a chance of a retreat from humankind and all their troubles, strifes, and sorrows. He came here just getting out of town and seeking for a possibility for a recluse to get away from baseness, vanity, vulgarity, and superficiality. He lost his way, of course, and ended up by chance in here, where he found every possibility of what he always had been looking for. He stayed, of course, and built the first small cottage, which he called the house, for he was skillful as a craftsman. Here he lived alone until one day there was a couple, young and innocent, eloping from their families who would not let them have each other, by restricting them and setting up conditions, failing to accept that love is unconditional. They came here, leaving all civilization far behind and hoping they would be forgotten by their own and all society, and were received most overwhelmingly and heartily by Manuel, who by that time had begun to long for company. That couple was my father David and my mother Celia. Of course, the house of Manuel was too little for all three, so Manuel and David built together one more better place for what they hoped would soon become a family. 4. A shepherd was the fourth one to arrive, a man who had been prosecuted but for nothing but his innocence, which he had failed to prove, and he was forced to leave society and just abscond from justice, which had proved abortive in his case. His name was Daniel, and that's where the tragedy began, for he fell hopelessly in love with Celia. The problem would have been avoided if not Celia also desperately fell in love with him. 5. I was expected then already, but before I had been born it was a fact that Celia already had known her lover, while my father David had resigned in sadness more or less. He built the last house here, a bit in further up the forest, which you cannot see from here, to live there by himself. So I was born not only out of wedlock, but of double wedlock, since I was received not by my father, but by Daniel. And did your father not object? Was there no jealousy, no natural defence for his so violated fatherhood? There was no quarrel, only conversation. "Celia," he said, "why did you do it?" "David, love is not resistible. It is, as you well know, completely unconditional, and Daniel took me by a storm. I fell in love with him, and there was nothing I could do about it." "But our son, did you not owe his father any loyalty?" "A child comes with the stalk. It is a gift by Providence, no matter who the father is, and is a person independent of his father and his mother spiritually from his birth. You have no right of property to him, neither have I, and neither have you any right of property to me. We are all independent, but with some responsibility towards our son and for each other in survival, but as friends and without bonds. We came here to be free, and there is nothing more important than that freedom for our lives and our community. And David left the others to be lone and sad, while Celia and Daniel stayed together to assume the full responsibility for me and for my well-being and health as infant. 6. Even in a paradise like this, life can become monotonous and boring. One day, longing for a change, my mother Celia took a walk and left the forest, just to see if the world outside still was there. It was, and with a vengeance. As she passed a field, there was a bunch of villains sitting in the shadow of a tree and almost lurking in a ditch. They were the first new people she had seen for years, so she accosted them quite naturally. She had been for years among most intimate and trusted friends in this, the safest of environments in all the world, and therefore was incapable of thinking any evil or suspicion about any man, but was instead, and on the contrary, uplifted by at last a meeting with new people, utterly ignoring and forgetting they were total strangers. As bad luck would have it, they were lurid strangers too, with minds bent only on their bestial desires. Desperate as bandits and quite ruthless in their lawlessness. 7. With joy she joined them with her waist-long golden hair, blue eyes and dressed in white like any virgin angel, hoping for some friendly conversation with new friends. But they were overcome by her spontaneous beauty, and exchanging looks and understanding, they were altogether of the same mind with but one idea. They ravished her, they left her bleeding in the ditch, with torn clothes dirty and unconscious, where she lay as dead. The evening came, and then the night, and she did not wake up until the morning, freezing terribly. 8. There was a young man then coming slowly down the road together with his cow that he was leading. As he saw a strange young lady in a critical condition sticking up her head out from a ditch, he wondered whether he was dreaming or experiencing a fae or banshee or whatever, but she had a voice and definitely needed help, and that decided him. "Who are you?" She just shook her head. "How come that you are here?" She did not know, and gradually it dawned upon him. She had had a terrible calamity and shock, and in the process lost her memory. 9. At home, among her lovers in the forest, they of course began to worry as to where she was and why she stayed away so long. "She must have left us," David said the third day, but both Daniel and Manuel thought differently, that something must have happened to her, and on the fourth morning Daniel left to search for her and left me to my father. Daniel was never heard of any more, and never more came back. After a week my father left me to the care of Manuel and went out searching too, but promised to be back. 10. My mother had been taken care of well by Joseph, as the young man's name was, who was with the cow, but she was restless and would not remain at home with him one day beyond the restoration of her health, but earnestly insisted on that she must find again what she had lost. She didn't even have a hunch about what had occurred to her or anything out of her history. The only thing she knew, and knew for certain, was that she had lost a priceless thing that had to be recovered. Nothing could restore her memory, no therapy, no rest, no cure, no deep research into her mind. Her grave amnesia seemed complete and hopeless, but she would go searching for her losses anyway, a quest and search in total blindness in the dark. But Joseph felt responsibility and would assist her, following her destiny as if it was his own. They had already left the forest far behind as he went down with her, down to his farm in the next county, and as now they wandered forth, they went unknowingly, completely in the wrong direction. 11. As they wandered aimlessly at random, they one sunny afternoon came down and faced the sea. They one sunny afternoon came down and faced the sea. I think, said Celia, that what I am searching for might not be here in England. Joseph acquiesced, and consequently they embarked upon a ship that would cross over into Flanders. But they were persecuted by bad luck, as suddenly a gale came sweeping from Biscaya, an outrageous storm that brought the ship into the North Sea, where it perished in the tempest of the waves. The last thing Joseph did was saving Celia's life by giving her a flotsam that would carry her while he was miserably drowned. Unconscious once again, she landed on the Danish coast. When she woke up, well taken care of by a valiant Dane, she could remember nothing from before her waking up in Denmark. All she knew was that she was in search of something most important that could never be abandoned, interrupted, or deserted. Meanwhile, David came exhausted back to us here in the forest. He had found a trace, but feared that Celia had left England. He went out again to go on searching endlessly if need must be. 1. The Dane who found the shipwrecked Celia on the shore, deserted naked in the wreck of what had been a lifeboat, was a humble man of gentle disposition with the name of Isaac. As she gradually recovered, he learnt all about her story, that she had forgotten it completely and had none to tell, except that there was something she had lost that had to be recovered. Isaac was intrigued by her mysterious case and, just like Joseph, would do anything to help her. She felt not at home in Denmark. Scandinavia was too cold and slow in mind for her, so she believed she had to search the continent for what she needed. Thus their strange odyssey started that would take them through a number of exotic and romantic countries. 2. They wandered through all Germany down to the Bodensee, where for some time they lingered in the beautiful surroundings until she was certain there was nothing for her there to find. They walked on eastwards and finally arrived in Vienna. There she found herself in spirit slightly liberated by the fact that Vienna was a capital of music, talented composers being active everywhere, especially a small man wearing spectacles who was distressed and driven to despair by some dilettante orchestra that could not get his music right, no matter how much he rehearsed and tried again, as if the music was too beautiful to be made justice. It was something of a ballet opera called Rosamundi. 3. There was also a most jovial composer with a most impressing beard with pea soup in it, playing hard at cards with an eccentric colleague with a most unpractical mustachio. If he was to drink whatever or eat soup, it was, as it was said, the waltz king and the king of symphony. But Vienna was not theirs for anything to find in spite of all the splendid music, so they just moved on, past Graz and into Italy. 4. In Venice they were asked to pose as models for a picture by an aged master who found something very striking in the homeless searching pair. He boasted he was almost 99 years old and active as a painter still, although his eyesight gave him problems and he used his hands instead of brushes. There was also an American, a bearded, melancholy fellow from Key West, who seemed quite sentimental, but in Venice, as in Vienna, they found nothing. So they just continued south as far as Sicily, returned from there to take a ship to Greece, which Celia loved and felt at home in, but still nothing was recovered. They continued into Turkey, Syria, and Israel, but there decided to return to Europe. 5. David found their trace in Danish Esbjerg, and from there he tracked them down through Germany and Austria to Italy and Greece, but there he lost their trail. 6. He still keeps searching for them somewhere on the European continent and mainly around the Mediterranean, and he is quite certain that he ultimately once will bring them back again. The sad thing is that they have never found their way, in spite of all their wanderings, back home to England, and not even into France, but keep on wandering and searching constantly, but in the wrong direction. If my mother, when she woke up in the ditch, had just sought shelter in the nearest forest, I am sure she would have instantly been saved, but she instead went searching constantly astray, as if the merest effort of her search was a blind alley. 7. David now and then came back, but each time after an extended search and longer journey, so the periods he was gone grew longer every time. Now he has not been back for 7 years, and when the 4th year came, my last friend Manuel here set out to help him. 8. Daniel is lost forever. There is no hope of his reappearance, after 16 years by now, and who knows where my father is. And finally there was a stranger coming here, and it was you, a lovable and humble monk with, I regret to say, the worst news possible of Manuel's death. I'm sure he aimed at coming back here with some news, but what that news was we shall never know. And out there somewhere, David, my good father, keeps on searching for his love, my mother Celia, who with Isaac keeps on wandering all over Europe, maybe also Asia, for the search of what she never can recover. I have given up all hope now after 16 years, and am content with just remaining here, as something of a hermit and preserving all the memories, the memory of her and what she lost, and keeping up their homes in case of their return, maybe after another 10 or 15 years. 9. The last thing David told me just before he left last time was something strange about my mother. When she last was seen in Israel 10 years ago, she was still young and fresh, without a trace of age, as if a tragedy had fixed her in unchanging youth, still blonde, with very long and golden hair, and with no wrinkle and not even crow's feet in the corners of her eyes. And Isaac also has remained as young as he was when he found her. Her mysterious age has halted up, it seems, and according to a sage and rabbi in Jerusalem, they will continue staying young unchanged as long as they continue on their search. Another case of Ahasuerus, but of opposite characteristics. Canto 7, 1. Thus concluded Gabriel his story. Malcolm looked at him aghast with admiration and compassion, turbulent mixed feelings, but was more impressed than he had ever been, especially by Gabriel's personality, which seemed serenity itself in perfect harmony and consummation of maturity and beauty, all embalmed in this fair youth of timeless charm. "If you are like your mother," Malcolm finally commented, "then indeed she must be the most beautiful of ladies in the world." "I take it as a compliment," said Gabriel, "not to myself, but to my mother." 2. Gabriel invited Malcolm to remain, of course, as long as he desired, and the monk was glad to do so, for some days at least. He spent the days in Gabriel's company in long discussions, spiritual conversations, and hard work in the organic gardens, with some necessary updating repairs on the 3 cottages. For years, and taught by manual, Gabriel had kept it up all by himself, but was now glad to have some help. 3. But finally the hour was come for Malcolm to depart. "I would not want my abbot to start worrying, and surely he expects me back with some anxiety, and so do many others." Gabriel agreed. "Of course, you must return and tell the others of our sanctuary here and of its story, whether they can manage to believe it or will disregard it. But this place exists, which no one can deny, and I am here to verify it. Naturally, I expect you back." "I know the way and cannot miss it," answered Malcolm, and they were agreed. 4. And then it came to pass that Malcolm left the forest. The same day he made it down to Winchester, and found the bishop there, his cousin, cordially expecting him with an enormous dinner. Malcolm entertained him all the evening with his story, and the bishop laughed his sides off, better every time he started a new round of laughter that shook all the vestry and all Winchester to its foundations. 5. Just a few days afterwards, the monk came back to Devon and found on a rosy morning his beloved abbot in his garden tending to his roses. "Well, my friend," the abbot said, most naturally calm, "what did you find? And what did you expect to find? Don't tell me you were disappointed." "On the contrary, my father, I found much more than I ever could expect. I found a forest." "Tell me what you mean," the abbot said, and he was mighty serious. Malcolm had no choice but to relate the entire story from beginning to the end, without omitting any details. 6. Afterwards the abbot kept his silence for a long while, thinking deep and thoroughly digesting Malcolm's strange account, as if to ponder whether he could take it seriously or as a fake. At last the abbot spoke, but without raising his grave looks. "My friend," he said, "this verifies what I believed in always. You have found a forest, but it's not unique. Each forest in the world is no less sacred than the one that destiny has led your footsteps to. In ancient days we worshipped every tree, especially the oaken ones, because they were the oldest, therefore the most venerable of all life's manifestations. Every kind of life is sacred, and not just your forest, although it may be the very ultimate, unalienable evidence of the eternal sanctity of every kind of life." 7. And thus the forest soon became a place of pilgrimage and worship. One of the 3 houses, Manuel's, the first one, was transformed into a chapel, and our brother Malcolm was bequeathed with the responsibility and taking care of it. A monk in charge thereof, he spent more time with Gabriel in the forest than at his own monastery. 8. Once a wayward wanderer came back from far abroad. It actually was David who had found a trace of Celia and Isaac far away in Persia and India. That's where he was heading next. He could not stay, he said, for more than a few days, but was impressed and enthusiastic about what the monks had done to cultivate the forest, raising it to a more sacred status than it had before, and making it a busy place for pilgrimage. 9. And thus the story ends. We know not whether David finally succeeded in his quest for bringing Celia and Isaac home, but there is always hope he did, although it can't be verified. The end.